Hey everybody, this is Instructor Eric Williams. This week's module was about computer hardware and it talked about quite a few items um, dealing with that. What we're going to focus on is talking a little bit more in depth about the CPU, which is the central processing unit. We'll talk about RAM a bit, and we'll talk a little bit more about hard drives, what they are and how they work. So um, let's get started. So we're going to use our VM to illustrate a couple of things about this. Um, so we're going to be in our VM. If y'all remember, my Panda is my VM when dealing with this. So what I want you to do is to go over here and I'm going to show you a shortcut. Now, a lot of times we do Control Alt Delete to get the task manager, but since you're IT people, there's a shorter way. You can hit Control Shift Escape, and that'll bring up your task manager. What we're going to switch over to is the performance. Now, why am I going to talk more about these three things? Because, well, these three items, the CPU, the memory, and the hard drive, really influence the speed of your computer. Now, a lot of people, it depends on who you ask, what's the most important part about what's the most important computer hardware? Uh, it could get deep, very deep. But what we're going to focus on is the relationship and what these three components are. So, one of the first things I want to show you is what happens when I click on a program. So if I click on Notepad++ here, if you notice the CPU jumped, the memory jumped, and the hardware jumped. Hard drive jumped. Now, why did these three things jump? Well, basically what's going on is I'm clicking on Notepad++, which accesses the hard drive, because of course this program is stored on the hard drive. And then in turn, the memory catches the instruction of opening that program, and those instructions are relayed to the CPU. The CPU then executes the command of opening Notepad++. Now, of course, there's a lot more involved. It does get more complicated, but this is a intro um, class, so we don't want to get too deep into it. You'll get more into it if you take the hardware class next. So that said, if I start typing, and let's try to type really fast, if you notice the CPU jumps up because of that. Now the RAM isn't affected as much because the instructions are, believe it or not, pretty benign when sending that over. But if you notice, the CPU, even with erasing, has jumped up down to 14%. It's now, I'm not doing anything. It's gone down back to 2. So, again, when you open a program, you're accessing the hard drive. From accessing the hard drive, it hits the memory with the instruction of, hey, open this program. Memory sends that instruction to the CPU. CPU executes the instruction back down to the memory and access the hard drive. So let's talk a little bit about your book went over it a bit, but let's talk a little bit about the hard drives. We'll start with hard drives. So there's more than two flavors now, um, but one flavor are the spinning hard drives, which think of it as a record player. This part spins, and this part has the needle, and so it's an actuator arm with a read and write head that actually moves. And I'll see if I can look for a video here in a second that shows that. Whereas a solid state or SSD hard drive works much like your USB. You plug it in and it writes electronically. There's no moving parts to this hard drive. That's the newer technology. You have another one now that's M.2, which is basically like half of this. It's a rectangle, and it's a form of solid state. In fact, these are starting to be the older technology now. Let's talk about RAM. Um, the RAM, there's two. There's different versions. We're on RAM 5 right now, so it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all these are about the speeds of the RAM. But the thing that I wanted to bring up was DIMM or SODIMM and microDIMM. Now, microDIMM, you'll see that a little bit, not much. But the two biggest ones you see are DIMM and SODIMM. DIMM is used in desktops. It's a much longer RAM, as you can see. SODIMM and microDIMM are both used in laptops primarily. However, I will say this: some of those smaller form factor desktops that you've seen, the really small ones that could be the size of a laptop, they'll use SODIMM in those. But primarily, you'll see a lot of this SODIMM in laptops. MicrodIMM was also used. It's not as widely used as SODIMM though. SODIMM kind of took to be the form factor that was mainly used for that. And then, in fact, I do have the video. Um, we're going to jump back to the hard drive here, and I'm going to come back to the video and show you what I meant by about that spinning. So if I hit the play button, you can see this starts up, and this is actually what goes on with one of the hard drives. It actually spins, and the actuator arm will actually move. See if we can't get to where it's moving. So you can actually see this says it's deleting a folder right now, but it's moving over. Again, think of it like a record. This is an older technology. It's not in use as much, except for a lot of companies still use them for long-term storage because hard drives are a lot cheaper than the solid-state drives. So they do have an economic benefit and why people still use them. But CPUs, that's going to be like your i7. The two biggest manufacturers of CPUs are AMD and Intel. Um, AMD has the Ryzen series. Intel has the i series. So you're talking about i3s, i5s, i7s, even i9s now, and vice versa. The Ryzen 9, Ryzen 7, Ryzen 5, Ryzen 3. Those are going to be the CPUs that are in there. So I'm not going to go too deep, like I said, into this video. I'm going to keep this pretty light. But one thing that I want to say is that in a virtual machine, you actually influence all of those factors. So let me pause this for a second. And I'm going to bring up the VirtualBox Manager. And here in the VirtualBox Manager, if I look at Windows 10, and we've been to this page before, but we skipped down and looked at the networking part where we changed it over to network address translation and not attached. Again, I keep mine on not attached most of the time. But we're going to go over here to the system settings. And in the system settings, you can see what we're talking about. Again, I would have to cut this off for us to be able to influence. But we can influence the amount of processors that we allow this to have, hence the CPU. We can also influence the amount of storage that we have for this one. We can also give it, let me see, I'm looking for RAM. I'm sorry, y'all. That's what this is. I'm sorry, back over here. This is the RAM that we're allocating for our virtual machine. I got 8 gigs on it. It's in megabytes, but 1,000 megabytes is 1 gigabyte. So I'm running 8 gigs on it. Nothing special. But yeah, so you can see how having a base knowledge of these components can even influence your VM. So let's do an experiment. Let's see here. We're gonna do something here. What we'll do is we'll minimize this. I'll take this virtual machine and I'll show you what I mean by that. Um, we'll unpause it. If you notice, the CPU is right at 11%. It jumped up to 40 with me clicking on Firefox. But again, this is not hooked up to the internet. But you can see those jumps, those spikes going on right now. But what happens if I take the memory down and the CPU down? Let's try that. So first we got to shut it down. And I'm going to pause the video while it's shutting down. So we're back with the video. And we just went back to the VirtualBox Manager. See it's powered off. We're going to go to settings. What we're going to do is we're going to see what happens if we take that stuff down. So I'm going to go to the system. I'm going to take it down to about half. We'll take it down to 4. About 4 gigs of RAM. We'll take the processor down to 2 processors. We'll hit OK. And we'll start it back up. Do you think this will have any kind of influence on the VM? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. So Windows is starting. Wow, I can tell you already that the startup itself has slowed down immensely. And again, I actually am an advocate of you to play with VMs, and that's why I had you install a VM, because you can play with these things all day long, try different combinations, different things, and you don't have to worry about hurting your actual computer. And yeah, now we got a black screen. I don't even know if it'll start. Well, it looks like it's trying to start. But as you can see, this is very, very, very slow. Um, just trying to start it up here. Okay, we started. Let's see if we can take a look at the CPU, RAM, and hard drive. Again, we're going to do Control Shift Escape. Yeah, you can see the difference with the memory and the CPU already. Now, I will say this is below the Windows minimum specs for running Windows, but you can just see how much of a difference that makes as far as the CPU and the memory usage. And if I click on Notepad++, let's see, I can see that jumping up to 80%, 35% of the memory. In fact, I just hit the performance tab, and it's still stuck on the processes tab. Yeah, it's locked up on me. Like, look, see how long that's taking? So yeah, you can see how crucial. And look, the hard drive is at 95%. Um, see those spikes. So yeah, it makes a big difference with how much RAM, CPU, and hard drive speeds that you have, and you can see that directly. So I encourage you to play around with it. You know, see what works best for you. I'm going to change mine back after this video, of course, because this is bottoming out, and I'm not even doing anything. And what's bottoming out is the processes that are running in the background. Windows has a bunch of processes. So if you look at Services tab, these are all things that are running in the background that we'll have to talk about in another class. But you can see all of these different things running. Well, some of these are running, some of them are stopped, but it depends on what you're doing. It'll spin up and start a service, depending upon what it is. So, I mean, Yeah, it gets pretty complicated, but I believe we're going to stop here for now. Um, if you have any questions or want to know anything else about how this works, like I said, I try to keep it light and easy because this is just an intro class. But if you have any questions, shoot me an email. Let me know about using this and what things you discover using it. For now, this is Instructor Williams signing off.